Good evening, and welcome to Alchemical Connections. This is Chrissy McMahon, your host, on this Sunday, February 9, 2014. The weather here in LaPorte, Pennsylvania is a cool 18 degrees. The moon is almost full. I'd like to start by thanking Live Mike for his eclectic mix of philosophy, geopolitics, morality, spirituality, and ethics, law and current affairs. And I'd like to thank all the listeners here at awakeradio.co.uk and shazizradio.com. We appreciate your support and look forward to your questions. And that brings me to tonight's very special guest, Jon Kelly, who I previously interviewed on my original Bob Chappell's Blog Talk radio show, still in archives, on the exciting research Jon has been developing for decades as a reverse speech analyst and UFO observer and videographer at the ECETI Ranch. Jon is a former feature producer for the CBS radio. With the #1 rated U.S. television experience, Jon Kelly is a professional speech analyst who publicly reported key intelligence pertaining to the Iraq War 2 years before it began. His highly rated independent research has been featured on USA Today, Dallas Morning News, Florida Today, Wall Street Journal, Independent IE, UB Irvine Today, Coast to Coast AM, Fox News, CBS Radio and Television, CBC, BBC London, Deutschland Radio, Berlin, AOL News, UFO Digest, and Forbes.com. Jon Kelly, are you with us?
Hi, Chrissy. It's great to be with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here to talk about Edward Snowden and some of the disclosures you found in your research in reverse speech.
Well, RT's Abby Martin has said recently that it's the job of a journalist to decipher what it is that the newsmakers are telling us. And so this deciphering work that I've been doing has received a lot of international attention over more than a decade since the turn of the millennium, when I went public with my studies and research. I found Edward Snowden to be a very topical figure and someone who is iconic in terms of issues related to privacy, surveillance, police state culture, the rights of the individual, a lot of constitutional rights that have been enshrined in the United States that are facing challenges on multiple fronts in the era of the Patriot Act. All of these seem to be caught up in the focus around Edward Snowden. Some people vilify him as a traitor, whereas to others he's a hero. And I recognize there's a lot of controversy surrounding him and his claims of having taken from the NSA their most top secret information and distributing that to journalists, including the Guardian newspaper. There are voices on many sides commenting on Edward Snowden, and when his interview with the Guardian that was recorded in Hong Kong was released in June of 2013, I saw that as an opportunity to conduct a study, a rare opportunity for perhaps a look inside the institutions that he had worked within as a contractor and a direct employee, to assess the psychology of such a personality, as well as any additional information that may help to vet his claims in terms of, is Edward Snowden telling the truth with regards to what he claims to be disclosing, as well as any other pertinent information. I write a column for Examiner.com. It's a highly rated column within the Examiner community. It's called the Vancouver UFO Examiner, and I've been writing that column for several years, and articles in that column have received widespread distribution. You may recall within the last few years, one of the websites that carried one of my articles was University of California at Irvine, their Today publication. Mm-hmm. The University of California at Irvine employs a scientist named Koresh Saberi, whose research was published in the journals Nature and was commented on in the by the British Royal Society in their philosophical transactions. And essentially, Dr. Saberi's claims were that speech is a multidimensional stimulus, and that there are many ways that we can extract a message from it, which is quite remarkable. My studies of human speech focus on only two dimensions. That is, we take conscious speech and we use digital audio technology to mirror or reflect the recordings of speech, the recordings of sound waves, and study those mirrored recordings. So for Dr. Saberi to have made claims about multidimensional speech, I cited him numerous times, and the university that employs him picked up one of my articles and ran it on their Today publication website. And so I expect there was some editorial vetting of the article before they posted it. They saw some relationship between my work and the claims of that scientist. And again, those claims had been discussed in very high scientific circles. The British Royal Society, that used to be led by Isaac Newton, one of the foremost scientists, foremost personalities in Western science at the time of the Age of Reason and the intellectual enlightenment. So Edward Snowden appears on the landscape as an interesting subject. I'm someone who's very interested in news and has spent a lot of time following stories. As you said in my brief bio, that it's widely known that I was reporting information concerning the Iraq War based on public domain recordings. In fact, the president's inaugural address was a source of insight for me, or became a window of insight into the intentions of the George W. Bush administration and the neoconservatives in his cabinet in terms of waging wars overseas, and particularly wars against Baghdad. So with a track record of publicly witnessed events where I had successfully anticipated local, regional, national, and international news stories through my reporting, I brought to bear the same procedure on the recordings of Edward Snowden. And I published two articles in my column, the Vancouver UFO Examiner. I published one article in June of 2013 entitled PRISM Mining UFO Data Targets False Flag ET Invasion as Pretext to Space Wars, in which I identified that from my perspective, Edward Snowden disclosed more than he may have intended to in an unconscious way. In other words, his unconscious mind contributed to his speech patterns to form additional communications, not unlike the way that the unconscious mind controls sleep talking. Chrissy, do you know anybody who talks in their sleep?
Absolutely.
Sleep talking isn't conscious behavior, and yet it's recognized as a form of verbal communications. The speaker, the sleep talker, isn't conscious of what they're saying, and there's no conscious volition involved in the forming of the words or expressions, and yet the organs are active, the lips are moving, the tongue, the larynx, to form speech communications. Well, this mirror speech, so to speak, just adds an additional twist, and it says that such unconscious communications occur as a form of encoding within normal human speech, and that these communications can be deciphered through an act of reflection. So using a digital audio workstation, I'm reflecting the recorded speech signal, the mechanical sound waves, and I am performing observations of those reflections to extract new information and new insight. My novel insight at that time, I was the lead journalist to run any information in the press concerning or Edward Snowden as related to the topic of UFOs or extraterrestrials. There are subsequent reports that have emerged starting late 2013, about 6 months after I ran my story. Different reports came up that are unsubstantiated, citing anonymous third-party sources. But my reporting is evidence-based. I actually have tangible audio that can be vetted, measured, evaluated, backing up my claims that I made these observations. You have some audio to share on your side.
So, and just before we go to that, the host from the earlier show, Live Mike, he's asking me several questions on the chat. If Edward Snowden is a psyops, if he's just working for the CIA, NSA Special Forces trained agent. And well, we already know that that's true. So maybe you'd like to give your perspective on the information. I've already responded that through my own research, I found that, like Assange, Edward Snowden has not leaked any information so far that hasn't already been disclosed through congressional review and other means. So maybe you can give your perspective on what you think of his character in this disclosure before we go to your amazing information. So go ahead.
Well, my perspective on the nature of the Edward Snowden disclosures is informed by my experience in reporting my observations. Specifically, when the Guardian newspaper hosted a live question and answer session with Edward Snowden, subsequent to his Hong Kong video interview, I participated by submitting my question, as did hundreds of other online participants, to the Guardian website. And my question was related to my Google News syndicated article discussing PRISM, UFO data mining, etc., simply requesting comment. I was, as a journalist, I was citing a vetted syndicated news article that had received widespread international syndication via Google News, and asking Mr. Snowden to comment on something that was out there in the public domain. Well, much to my surprise, I discovered that shortly thereafter, the Guardian newspaper staff actually took my question down from their website. They removed the question.
Wow.
Now, there were hundreds of questions, pages of questions that were posted, and when I went through the transcript of the live Q&A, I noted that they may have only actually brought up 6 to 8 or 10 of the questions. A limited number of questions were actually asked of Mr. Snowden. Out of the hundreds that were submitted, very few were asked, which is reasonable given time constraints.
Right.
But there's a difference between ignoring a question and physically pulling it off of your website. So I contacted the Guardian newspaper's management team, the people responsible for administrating that site, and inquired as to why they were censoring journalistic inquiries. And they responded by claiming that my question was off topic. But I didn't.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't find that credible in light of what I've cited, which is that of the hundreds of questions that were asked, most were simply ignored. But they actually pulled my question off their site. I saw that to be an act of censorship in terms of what's described as prior constraint. Mm-hmm. The concept of prior constraint is widely understood in British law. Even at the time of the forming of the U.S. Constitution, there was written reference to the concept of prior constraint, which is a means of limiting the available information in the marketplace of ideas. In other words, if people can't discuss an issue or a topic or raise a question, it impoverishes discourse, and it's a way of moving towards mass ignorance. And so, through
Absolutely.
an act of prior restraint, the Guardian was engaged in censorship, which is again something. The Guardian is a British newspaper. Prior constraint is understood in the British courts and has had long-standing reference for several hundred years. It's also understood in the United States, but I saw that as a clear act of censorship. And so my conclusion, based on that experience, was simply that Edward Snowden was far less like a man on the street, so to speak, or the everyman, or the populist hero, but it was much more like a candidate in a political campaign in terms of the stage management, mm-hmm. whereby questions concerning information that's in the public domain, that's widely syndicated, are being censored from what are ostensibly public interactions with Mr. Snowden, stage managed. That seemed unlikely to me that Edward Snowden was an everyman in that sense, and it seemed much more likely that the entire disclosure process that's proposed that he's participating in was something that was stage managed and had characteristics of an operation. So I don't pretend to understand more about that, but I do recognize that respected whistleblowers such as Sibel Edmonds have commented on this in clear and unambiguous terms, raising some of the points that you've identified, whereby Edward Snowden apparently hasn't really come up with anything new. Nothing that he's supposedly revealed is news to anybody. But at the same time, particularly the mainstream press has been milking this story in an ongoing saga, in a long, drawn-out campaign of pseudo-disclosure, so to speak. And people, insiders like Ms. Edmonds, are questioning, what purpose does that really serve? Is this just propaganda for intelligence or top secret America that the Washington Post has described? Is that really, a campaign to indoctrinate people into the culture of the surveillance society, the Big Brother society, or the spy versus spy snitch society that's been fomented since the introduction of the Patriot Act? I think those are reasonable questions. My role as the Vancouver UFO Examiner isn't to directly examine those particular issues that the listener has raised, but rather to attempt to extract from the public statements of Edward Snowden what little information could possibly gleaned, particularly pertaining to UFO and ET contact disclosure and exopolitical disclosure. And that's really been the angle under which I've approached the story. In other words, I have no affiliation with any alphabet agency, police, or intelligence or military. I'm purely an independent outsider, whereas much more seasoned insiders have already ID'd Edward Snowden as some form of operative. I mean, the list goes on. There's somebody in Hawaii who claims that the Edward Snowden pretense that he's this insider operative from Hawaii was based on his life story. Somebody else, other people are coming forward saying that they're the real whistleblowers and that it's ridiculous that Snowden is getting such coverage, stealing the headlines, so to speak.
Yes.
Whereas there are more worthy candidates to be recognized as whistleblowers who are relegated to the shadows or who are being marginalized.
Killed, suicided. Let me just add, I was just reviewing the Germany interview that he had in late January, and they're absolutely presenting him as like the only person who's come forward with this information. I mean, it's like they're putting that meme into the populace, like not only in the United States, but now in Germany. They're giving everybody the impression that Edward Snowden is the only person who's come forward with this information. And in my research for our interview, in 1973, I forget the name of the congressman, there was congressional oversight into the NSA, and they wanted to know just exactly what was
the Pike Committee.
The Pike Committee, right? Absolutely. Thank you. And what was its pretext? I mean, he wanted to know, and all this information about how it even came into being. And as a result, they just undermined him. His material was discarded, and that further gave credence to their accusations that he was incompetent. And the head of the CIA at the time was, yours truly, Bush Sr. So, and what one of the questions that was also raised in the Germany interview was that they're basically the government, the executive branch, is doing backstep. Snowden called it wagon circling, to protect the security agencies and not the people from the agency. So I think in a sense it's good that people are aware of it, but I guess like you, it's just so much to comb through, so much information and try to grasp in a week. It's a little bit overwhelming, but thank you for that explanation.
Well, I think that this idea of putting all of the focus disclosure or secrecy or populist hero onto one individual it can be perceived as a means of controlling public discourse, because
Right.
that the authority of that individual then begins to supersede or overshadow the authority of perhaps more legitimate contenders at the expense of more meaningful discourse. As you said, there appears to be a vacuum in terms of actual meaningful information coming out of coming from these supposed revelations. And again, that's not the focus of my work. Although I will state that I have a history of identifying illegal domestic operations of the CIA, publicly revealing them through my studies, and in fact, that has contributed to professional career-limiting issues as a result of the backlash from my doing so. So my application of these communication studies has applications in identifying the presence of illegal domestic operations that are unconstitutional and apparently are going on all the time. So
Absolutely. Did you want to just mention about your disclosures with Obama, and also, if you feel comfortable, the logical fallacy of appealing to authority, or however you want to say it? I mean, that just seems to be one of the underlying factors in trying to get people to really understand the reasonableness of looking at this information. So let me be quiet.
well, my studies, President Obama, are not pertaining to illegal domestic spying operations as much as I simply have been maintaining a tradition of studying the inaugural addresses of the U.S. presidents, because it was the George W. Bush inauguration in January 2001 that led to my interception of information related to the Iraq War.
Okay.
So I felt it was important to continue looking at presidents when President Obama was speaking during his inaugural address. But my findings from that address that I felt were of significance related to concepts about UFOs, and so I foresaw that the Obama years would have something to do with UFOs, perhaps disclosure, perhaps some large-scale event. I certainly found it significant that at the high point of one person's political career, assuming the responsibility of what has been described as like the most powerful job in the world, the leader of the U.S. military, that person at that same time would be entertaining concepts about UFOs was fascinating to me, but it was certainly not some means of identifying President Obama as a CIA operative, et cetera, which is a claim that has been forwarded by others. That was not my conclusion based on that study. The appeal to authority is simply, we have a celebrity-fascinated culture that expects A-list type of personalities, or type A personalities to evangelize positions. And how that manifests in the political sphere is a de facto two-party system, where political heroes compete in debates and elections and so on. But the obsession with the personality versus the ideology or the message is what detracts from the wisening of the public. The over-obsession with the personality is detracting from lucid thinking and rational weighing of ideas and evaluation. So we have this overall dumbing down of the masses is in part the cult of personality that we see is contributing to that. So that's my comment. This argument to authority with so much vagueness surrounding Edward Snowden. Who is Edward Snowden, etc. Who is this whistleblower? are we just to embrace this new person who appears on the stage because CNN and Washington Post and the New York Times are screaming about him? Is this our new, our new flavor of the month personality? It's very questionable. I think I rely on the claims of the seasoned insiders, particularly Sibel Edmonds. I think is a key individual, someone who was under something like a 6-year gag order.
Wow.
Over her insight into intelligence leading up to the events of 9/11 and how that was suppressed, and how her testimony was struck from the record, I think, by the 9/11 Commission, and she was subject to a multi-year gag order, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a much more authentic voice. So I rely on perhaps on the insight of others when related to those questions, not just my own opinions.
Right, and I didn't get from her article that she was saying that Edward Snowden was just a psyops, but more or less that he was being presented as the only one who had ever released this information, so that there is a trend to meme Edward Snowden as the poster boy for whatever, the word escapes me, for a disclosure.
Yeah, and so I recognize that there's two camps. One vilifies him, the other embraces him, and I'm not party to either camp. And it's in terms of my study or my conclusions, it's irrelevant to me, quite frankly, because irrespective of whether or not he's a traitor or a hero, what I'm looking at is a deeper level of disclosure than what is currently in the public arena. In other words, my conclusions are not part of the mainstream discourse. I've taken a leap over the horizon into what I feel are disclosures that are almost unspeakable for a variety of reasons, and they are pertaining to two specific areas. One is human contact with UFOs and extraterrestrials, and the other is human psychic potential or consciousness potential. And if we study the history of the United States in the last 50 or 60 years, and particularly in military intelligence circles, we know that two ideas, one related to the weaponization of space, exist, and the other being the militarization of human psychology, or what people would call in an Orwellian sense, the thought police, or what is advanced by an infamous and notorious figure in U.S. military psychological warfare is what's called mind wars. So,
and also, before you go any further, the movie with Tom Cruise, the pre-crime Bureau of Pre-Crime, and I forget the name of the movie, but I mean, it's like it's right out of the Hollywood. This is insane, like what's happening. They're recording everything, and they have been since the 70s. I mean, now we're very much aware of that. But that is that where we're moving to? And I mean, I could get into consciousness level thought of my perspective of how I think they use these concepts, they use these pictures, these images to try to move their agendas in a direction that they want to. So that's kind of getting off topic, but
well, to speak to the points that you've raised, uncontrolled disclosures via non-official persons upset the apple cart of the vested interests who have long-standing programs and investments in Space Wars initiatives and Mind Wars initiatives. And my research and reporting is speaking directly to both of those issues. And so I will say that what I have produced is intensely controversial. You see, not only am I moralizing over the rightness or wrongness of Edward Snowden emerging in as a public figure, but which is a question that many people feel a lot of anxiety about. I'm looking several layers deeper into initiatives that are cloaked heavily in secrecy and are parts of black budget operations or black projects, which is the secret world of top secret America. So I'm saying that although I'm not here necessarily to satisfy the proponents or the antagonists, the pro or anti-Edward Snowden camps, what I'm really engaged in is bringing forward the urgency of issues pertaining to the weaponization of space and the militarization of the mind in terms of collective and individual psychology, which are both marginalized. They continue to be marginalized issues, although there are important proponents who have come forward and said a lot about these things. These are not topics that we're seeing every night on the 6 o'clock news. In other words, when a senator was interrupted during an interview with one of the major broadcasters for late-breaking news about Justin Bieber's arrest,
oh, cripes, yeah,
we recognize that even discourse from thoughtful people concerning the surveillance society is being marginalized. What to say about mind wars against with the state versus the individual, or the potential, as former Canadian National Defense Minister Paul Hellyer has indicated, the potential of starting a war with extraterrestrials due to an obsession with out-of-control Space Wars programs, taking shots at UFOs to foment a war. He's concerned enough about that to speak about it. These are issues that are not they're not getting enough focus in the public arena, but I am very certain that there are massive black budget investments and multi-generation careers within Top Secret America tied into those initiatives.
Absolutely. And High 503 was interested in knowing if you have ever read the book, or you would like to comment on Mind Wars, written by Michael Aquino.
Well, that is the individual who I'm citing as an intensely notorious and infamous individual.
Absolutely.
And this is, from my perspective, examining the history, the published history pertaining to that individual, is that the shield of national security is being used as a cover for not only professional misconduct, but apparently for criminal conduct as well. And particularly in Michael Aquino's case, there are substantial allegations of child sexual abuse.
Yes.
And that were never in a court. He was never indicted, et cetera, et cetera. He was the San Francisco. There are Mae Brussels commented in some of her broadcasts that she was talking to San Francisco police officers when the Presidio child abuse case had emerged in the 1980s, that Michael Aquino was being shielded from prosecution. And my conclusion is that shield was citations of national security interests. But this is where the Top Secret America becomes a playground for professional misconduct and criminal misconduct, and that is the great cost of sustaining a society or a culture of secrecy at the expense of every other human value. And so this is part of the quandary that we see ourselves in. My surface analysis of these Satan-worshipping churches that have gained recognition even within the U.S. military, and
right.
were portrayed as religious minorities during the 1980s in what history revisionists cite as a moral panic, comparable to a witch hunt against religious minorities of the time. Quite frankly, my conclusion, based on just a brief analysis, is that those supposed religions are really fronts for military intelligence psychological operations, not unlike Jonestown under Jim Jones was also a front, whereby there are many deaths in the mass suicide, so to speak, or what is described as a mass suicide, by ingesting Kool-Aid, which is another meme in our culture, drinking the Kool-Aid, right, when we reference cult-like behavior. Well, there are substantial reports that a lot of people were shot in the back trying to get away from that place.
Yes.
And there were there were too many gunmen to have just been one shooter. It's more like there were military operatives encircling the camp, and that the whole thing was an operation from start to finish. That's why there was a dead senator connected to that. Someone went to investigate. So I'm throwing back to the listener that claiming a shield of religious minority status is really a front for ongoing psychological warfare operations. And Michael Aquino has written in his book, from my review of the notes, that such operations must be conducted against the domestic United States population by its own military. So here's an advocate for domestic operations against the military, anti-constitutional, it's un-American. When we look at post-1980s ritual murder events like Waco, we can see the coloration of those events in the reports which are available online. There's a Waco museum online that shows the photographs of the corpses of the people inside the encampment that were stacked up inside one of the concrete buildings. In other words, the crime scene was heavily manipulated, and the bodies were moved and mutilated at the scene. In other words, there were indications of ritual murder associated with the culture of the death of those people. And I suggest, based on a cursory examination, that this is symptomatic of leadership initiatives whereby ritual murder practices under the guise of satanic religious worship are influencing the conduct of operatives. The military operations are being turned into satanic free-for-alls and left-handed occult practices. So I would say that is incredibly disturbing. And just to sort of summarize, Michael Aquino is implicated in the Boys Town abuses of the 1980s. He's implicated in the Johnny Gosch disappearance. Who emerged as a fake journalist, apparently Jeff Gannon, in the early part of the millennium, someone who was in the White House press room at the briefings, is alleged by the mother of the missing boy to be her son, turned into some sort of operative. Michael Aquino is implicated in that. Michael Aquino is implicated, I believe, in Iran-Contra and many other forms of nefarious activity and malfeasance. And this is an individual who still enjoys freedom to speak and publish and protection as a religious minority, etc. But I say, based on my cursory examination, that that this is even occurring is symptomatic of the defective philosophy guiding a security and secrecy obsessed society. This is the cost that people are paying for endorsing and supporting a society that is actively involved in molesting children at airports. I mean, this is the price that we're paying: is that we've got individuals walking free, running roughshod over the public, with no recourse to the judiciary. This is a symptom of a malaise in our society. So, I hope that's responsive to that listener's inquiry.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I'm really grateful for you to have brought up all those different connections to the meme of Mind Wars and how it's played out in this one aspect with child pedophilia and the satanic cult of the cult of Set, or I'm not sure what you call it, the Temple of Set, and my last guest was Douglas Dietrich, who actually was working in the military alongside Michael Aquino. I don't know how you feel about him, but his explosive information has been mind-boggling, and I think it's helped to explain in clearer terms just how diabolical this dark underworld that exist within our government, within the military, and it's not just within the United States. I think they're globally. These countries are connected on this darker, deeper level, and
so
I think we're getting closer to that. Yeah, go ahead.
So, as a Canadian, I live in a country and in a province where mass killings, Serial murders have been cited, Robert Olson, Robert Picton, but the federal police are implicated in the murders of First Nations prostitutes, Native Canadian prostitutes, and the Queen of England is implicated in the deaths of Native Canadian children. So we never had a revolution or pseudo revolution here. We're still the Queen is still the head of state in Canada, but aligned with what you said, we're on the direct receiving end of that type of a culture, that type of negative and destructive culture. It's happening here. There's still people disappearing. There's ritual murder associated with the Picton killings, and I interviewed attorney Alfred Lambermont Weber and posted that to my YouTube channel concerning the disclosures that I identified in the voice of Robert Picton pertaining to ritual murder, identifying, in other words, that he was not a lone killer, but there was a conspiracy of death that he was just another figurehead of. And so, just as Lee Harvey Oswald was identified as the lone gunman, by dispensing with him, it's a means of closing the book on public discourse, whereas there's a lot of meaningful questions that are not being addressed, and it's the same here. So this is certainly not a vilification of U.S. society, but it's rather speaking truth to the condition that Western societies face. United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia, all of us by circumstances find ourselves caught up in this, and it's really the responsibility of people with a conscience to act on that conscience and to reestablish a foundation of morality in the face of rampant corruption and criminality. Absolutely. At the highest levels.
Absolutely. And with that said, now we can go into what you would like to talk about tonight, and that would be Edward Snowden's connection. Well, not his connection, but the connection through your research to UFOs and how that applies to our future and our present. So
my conclusions pertaining to the Edward Snowden disclosures, this is the live interviews, the on-camera interviews. I see Edward Snowden accessing Alphabet Agency UFO and ET contact information and communicating about it in an involuntary way. And so we have a series of clips that I would like us to review together. And the first one is the UFO clip. What we'll listen to forwards is the raw sample in which Edward Snowden describes things that restrict the activities of a surveillance state, and that his envisioning a turnkey tyranny as a result of the existing political process. When that audio is played backwards or mirrored or reflected, within that reflection I can hear him say the words, "those UFOs." So if you will, please play the clip.
So do you want those UFO clip
that restricts
That's our
activities of the surveillance state,
go.
our policy, even our agreements with other sovereign governments, we consider that to be a stipulation of policy rather than a stipulation of law. And because of that, a new leader will be elected. They'll flip the switch, say that because of the crisis, because of the dangers that we face in the world, some new and unpredicted threat, we need more authority, we need more power, and there will be nothing the people can do at that point to oppose it, and it'll be turnkey tyranny.
Yeah, that's really clear.
Now, from my side, Chrissy, just as a quick note, I hope the listeners could hear that. It didn't come through in my feed.
Okay. You couldn't hear it?
I didn't hear it. Does the chat room indicate that they could hear it?
Let me ask. Did they hear it? Did anyone? We can play it again.
As long as it's going out to the audience, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have my audio on because it gives the feedback to my voice, and it's an awful, awful sensation.
Well, I'll assume that they heard it unless one of them indicates otherwise for us. But this was my first glimpse at what I perceive to be an alternative line of inquiry into the testimony of Edward Snowden. In other words, he wasn't talking consciously about UFOs, but it appeared to me that his unconscious was volunteering information as if this was a subtext to his journey of discovery or insight. If, in fact, Edward Snowden was, as he claimed, in a position in the IT departments in these institutions to have oversight and access to the files on everyone's computers, Forbes.com and other publications have stated point blank that he had access to the NSA's most secret files. Now, a couple of seasoned veteran military intelligence people in my discussions on Facebook with the different communities have commented on my claim that Edward Snowden could have access to that information. One gentleman said that the encoding or the encryption or the designation for UFO and ET related data is different or has special designation in their file keeping system, and stated that it would not be possible for Edward Snowden to be privy to that from his position in IT. Mm-hmm. But I say that at the same time, Forbes.com is saying unambiguously the most secret files. They're not citing any exceptions. So while there are different voices from veteran people from inside of intelligence organizations who have opinions and are sharing them about these questions, I say this is still a worthy line of inquiry, that it's possible, from my estimation, that he has something to say about this. And here I say this was an early glimpse into this topic. And so...
Right. And let me tell you that they did hear it. And also, what does Forbes have to do with the disclosure, since I thought it was the New York Times and the Guardian and another source that was in another country were the recipients of Snowden's, what he stole, the archives.
Well, to clarify, everybody who's anybody in journalism has written an opinion about Edward Snowden.
Right, absolutely.
So I'm simply citing that a well-established publication has a staff writer who has written. I cited him. I don't have the reference handy, but I have cited that. Andy Greenberg, I believe, is the writer's name.
Okay, I can look that up.
Has cited, and I think in one of the threads I shared with you that I threw out that link. It shows that the editorial staff at these well-established publications are green-lighting such remarks, or they would never make it into print. There's a sense, a feeling that Edward Snowden had unlimited access to everything. So I'm saying on that pretense that it's possible that he had access to these even most secret files. That's what they're saying. Most secret. I mean, what's more secret than most secret? Is that? I mean, is that enough to clarify that my feeling about that?
Oh yeah, no. I just wanted to ask that for clarity, because I know that Forbes wasn't one of the magazines or one of the resources that were involved in the disclosure of the information. So that's why that was the only reason why I asked. And in case you didn't hear me, the podcast was heard all the way to the UK, I believe. So everybody can hear them.
I suggest that I could find citations from authors within the publications that you're referring to saying the same thing. There's consensus, in other words, in the editorial community that Edward Snowden had access to the most secret files, and I'm simply offering Forbes as an example, being a long-standing established publication, an establishment publication. In fact.
And we can also argue that that's further evidence that they're supporting the meme that Snowden is the only one who has this authority, and he's the one who's exposing the NSA and everything that the United States is doing to compromise these other governments.
So exactly, Snowden is being portrayed as our ultimate insider, acting on behalf of the public. And you can't have it both ways, He can't be the ultimate of ultimate insiders, except he didn't know certain things.
Right.
You can't have it both ways. So if I may be, it may be rhetorical on my part to leverage that position, but it's a widely recognized editorial position that he had the most secret files.
Right.
All right. So what does this mean? What does this really mean? From my perspective, if Snowden is authentically, who he claims to be at a minimum, which is that he was an employee of the CIA and a contractor for the NSA, that there are perceptions amongst the staff, the people working inside of those organizations related to ETs and UFO contact, or UFO and ET contact information. It's within the culture of those organizations that the water cooler dialogues may include references to that. That's not something that's part of the culture or the public face of those organizations. We have seen some sharing of paperwork from the CIA and I believe the NSA as well. In other words, there have been some files released, but it's not considered to be part of the everyday operations. It's certainly not portrayed that way. If we see UFOs in the news, on the 6 o'clock news, it's not because the NSA or the CIA told us so. It's because somebody with a cell phone, looked up and made a recording on a man on the street, so to speak, or a woman in a community who's a participant. It's not official disclosure. It's non-official personalities. So here I am as a non-official individual, advancing a process of disclosure and publishing and engaging in public debate and dialogue about it. And I'm saying that this is provocative on a number of fronts because there are deep vested interests in maintaining the culture of secrecy around initiatives, black project initiatives focused on contact, and Snowden's being shrouded in alphabet agency glamour as former CIA and former NSA is bringing the memes. I'm disturbing the meme production line by introducing these concepts into the public perceptions of Edward Snowden and what his discourse or dialogue or testimony may reveal. I said earlier that there's stage management of the revelations.
Absolutely.
Which has been cited by other prominent individuals like Sibel Edmonds. So I am interfering, so to speak, with the process of stage management through my exercise of constitutionally protected free speech and as a journalist, and that is apple cart tipping activity. Right. So while we only have one tidbit from this first story, I extrapolated upon that to go on to discuss Project Paperclip scientist Dr. Werner von Braun, his foresight into indicating during the 1970s that the United States would play terrorists, meteorites, and aliens as premises for upgrading the military and police institutions and putting the U.S. on a permanent war footing, and we've already seen some of that come through. He foresaw this as an insider back in the 1970s and talked to his colleagues about this. So I extrapolated upon that, and I concluded I was sympathetic to Edward Snowden, feeling that perhaps that the emergence of that message was related to a conflict of consciousness on his part, a conflict of conscience, on his part, that he himself was disturbed by being party to that information or having observed the channeling of UFO and ET related information into files that were case building towards premises of ET invasions and the need for space wars. It's not a mystery or a secret to those who've followed the UFO topic that public reporting of UFO information to institutions such as the Mutual UFO Network, that public reporting has been channeled into private hands. Robert Bigelow is cited as the recipient of the information going to MUFON.
Wow. Into
private corporate hands. That's really not public interest. That's the corporatization of public resources from institutions that are acting as public resources. Reporting centers.
Right.
There are claims concerning Peter Davenport's UFO reporting center based on his prior employment with the NSA.
Right.
that these organizations are simply operating as fronts for intelligence gathering to fuel secret initiatives in the top secret America culture where there's a separation from the public and their supposedly democratically elected governments. The initiatives on the other side of the fence have nothing to do with public awareness, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm saying that here emerges this Edward Snowden into the world stage, bearing a conflict of conscience pertaining to his insights into data collection about UFO information, but not towards peaceful initiatives. But I'm extrapolating and saying it's towards space wars, which we discussed earlier as a long-standing initiative and something that former Canadian Defence Minister Paul Hellyer has cited as a means for fomenting war with extraterrestrials that are most certainly, from a technological perspective, would be considered absolutely catastrophic
Right.
for our present society to engage in. I mean, we would be biting off far more than we could possibly chew in considering that as a reasonable course of action.
Well, and also I think, what are the realities of us needing to go to war with aliens when we can just look over the last 100 years and there's no real evidence that in the public sector to prove that aliens have been trying to attack us in the context of Hollywood.
Well, there's two camps, again, that we can identify easily. One is the camp that feels that all extraterrestrials are good, and the other camp that feels that the extraterrestrials are bad, and they cite the phenomena of alien abduction.
Right.
So those two camps exist. This is the cultural context into which any disclosure or discourse about UFOs and extraterrestrials is taking place in the public domain. And that certainly would appear to be a vast oversimplification, to polarize a population as either good or bad. But we can see as a precedent in human history that the demonization of the indigenous populations is always served as a pretext for imperialistic wars of colonization and exploitation. So, in other words, when the Native American population was demonized from the church pulpit as soulless and subhuman, that became a pretext for genocidal war against the population to clear the way for mass immigration from the East Coast to take over the prairies and California, etc. That's part of U.S. history. And we have the same problem in Canada, whereby our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, is cited for starving the First Nations populations as a policy. Starvation as a policy. I mean, it's vile.
We have a host, Lisa Lale, and her husband Al, who are in Canada. They're in Nova Scotia, and they do excellent research on First Nations. And we have a lot of activists from Canada that come on our show, and you can check out our resources. But we've been made very much aware of, and Kevin Arnett, what he's exposed. And I believe it's Catholic Church.
Kevin Arnett, exactly.
That's implicated with the Queen. I know Alfred's been posting a lot of things that are kind of hinting at that Kevin Arnett would be the scapegoat in the end run of trying to bring the Queen to some kind of investigation or
justice.
What's been happening in Canada.
So to return to our thread, the demonization of indigenous populations has long-standing use in human history as a means to incite mass hysteria and mob behavior amongst domestic populations who are otherwise peace-loving and rational. Military service training has to break down the morality of the recruit to turn them into killers, because any trainer will tell you it's not normal human behavior to kill another human being.
Absolutely, and I don't think that it's really part of our nature. I think it's an entrainment, and it's been forced into our DNA for centuries. It's not for longer, but it's been part of our culture for thousands of years, and we can cite evidence of that archaeologically and through religion and politics. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
So continuing along the thread, what does this mean in terms of extraterrestrials? I'm saying that the demonization of the extraterrestrials is simply a projection of the same initiative to foment mass hysteria against indigenous populations. My perception as a field researcher engaged in active UFO contact and documentation is that those entities are indigenous, that they reside here. In other words, the ETs that I and many others are filming are not flying directly from another galaxy to appear on our cameras just for a special appearance. But the reason we're actually able to get into proximity with them is because they're here, residing alongside of us here. They're indigenous. So that is the perception I bring. So to clarify, in the rhetorical world, there are two very strongly defined positions. One, with regards to the nature of the extraterrestrials, one is that they're all good, 100% guaranteed, and the other is that they're evil and they want to eat us or something like that. And I say if we translate it into human populations, we know that neither one of those definitions really applies to human populations. Human populations are neither entirely evil nor entirely benevolent. It's a bell curve, and that is what we really need to bring to the table, I think, when we approach questions about the nature of extraterrestrial life that we may be encountering or have already encountered, is that the morality or the moral scale, their position on the moral scale or the moral compass is somewhere on a bell curve of conduct, behavior, and ideology, and that is what we should anticipate. So I don't enshrine the extraterrestrials as some saintly, religious beings, or some beings that we should be venerating in some religious way. I'm not
Absolutely
advocating for a UFO cult, so to speak, but at the same time, I am not intimidated by propaganda that demonizes the extraterrestrials in any way whatsoever. I interviewed a prominent case, a person involved in a prominent case, apparently involving abduction in British Columbia, and that person's case was brought to television in the United States through one of the many television shows that attempts to portray contact issues in modern culture that we see on Discovery or other major broadcasters. And from the portrayal that was offered on television, I do live research in the region where these events were supposed to be taking place, up in the British Columbia interior. I have access to facilities up there. We do live contact events on a regular basis that we film. And if I was to believe that the portrayal that was offered on television was actually real, I would be standing out there in the middle of an off-grid location, like the middle of nowhere pretty well, believing that there were extraterrestrials hidden behind every tree that were going to come out and try to abduct me and my colleagues. I mean, that would be the kind of hysteria that kind of broadcast would attempt to foment. I mean, so it's so beyond ridiculous. In other words, like I say, I've paid homage to both camps. I've given voice to both positions to avoid perceptions that I am biased or marginalizing the voices of people who may have been traumatized for different reasons that I may not understand. But I would suggest that at the same time, there are dangers there are dangers of extreme positions, adopting or embracing extreme positions, and I hold that people who say that, who make claims that, things we see on Facebook like Dr. Greer is the way. When people say things like that, when they intone incantations that invite perceptions of cult-like psychology,
Right, absolutely.
I find that to be highly questionable and in fact socially dangerous. So I don't embrace either position, but at the same time, it should be noted that I'm not an armchair critic of the UFO community. I'm an active participant and contributor, and I'm actually a documented contact person in terms of video documentation and heavy rosters of witnesses who've accompanied me. So this is the voice of somebody who's actually on the front lines of the issue, not just making proclamations from a podium at a conference. I'm actively involved, hands-on with the issue, and that's my perception.
Absolutely, and your knowledge base, besides the experience that you've amassed through this research and your studies, is phenomenal, and that's why this is so important. That as you're disclosing this information, this is not just because you think, well, I can hear that he's saying UFO or alien, so this is important. You have a history of this particular technique of mirroring reverse speech and being able to show through the unconscious that this is evidence, and you've shown that probably in the last few decades through your work. So I'm not sure how long, but I think it's really important to stress that this is not somebody who just decided to write a book and you think this is a great technique or a great way to look at things, but this is something that you've gone through different stages of presenting this evidence through governmental agencies, looking also at the presidents, looking at children. I mean, you've just gone through different stages of disclosing this information, and I believe with my whole heart that what you're presenting is accurate information, and what you said at the beginning of the interview was that it was, unfathomable that they didn't just ignore your questions, they deleted them. So does that give more credence to your question? But I think, trying to erase your, I'm losing words, but the work that you've done and given credence even to the fact that this is professionalism. This is at the most highest scientific level that you could do in this sort of research, and you've been very specific in keeping this to what you're doing here, what you're showing us, the information you're presenting.
Well, in the course of presenting my work to the public over many years, and since the late 1990s, as you've indicated, I've had the opportunity to engage in debate and to hear the arguments from skeptics and critics. And one of the foremost arguments that's still voiced today is that observations conducted through the use of mirrors must be entirely psychological in nature, or people only hear what they want to hear. But I find that the precedent within science informs us otherwise. For example, Isaac Newton, who I referenced earlier, is famed for his development of the reflector telescope, whereby he claimed that he was observing the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter. Now, he was using a telescope, but the objective was a mirror, and it was made out of metal. At the time, it's an alloy or a mixture of different metals called a speculum metal, a speculum meaning mirror in Latin. And it's reported that that mirror only possessed 66% reflectivity. In other words, 34% of the light that was transmitted to that object was absorbed by its surface, and only 66% of that light was reflected back. And so 34% loss by any standard is a substantial amount. There's cases in the present day in the news of people who were $100 short on their tax bills being sent to jail. You know, they owed $1,100 and they paid $950. That's a margin of less than 30%, but it's seen in the justice system as cause for prosecution.
Yeah.
If I go to the store and I want to buy a $1 soda pop, and I offer the vendor 66 cents, they're going to say,
"You're not going to get a soda.
You're 34 cents short." So it doesn't take a professional scientist to understand that a 34% margin is substantial. And yet, at the same time, those people who would say to Isaac Newton, "Well, my goodness, you know, here you are with this mirror, and it's only 66% reflective," and making these assertions about phenomena out there in the heavens, how can we be so sure that this is not simply psychological in nature? Mm-hmm. You know, Mr. Newton, you must certainly be hallucinating if this is your methodology that you propose. And yet, we know the fact is that more than 300 years later, Newton's claims pertaining to the phases of Venus, in that it eclipses and occults and waxes and wanes just like our moon does, mm-hmm. those are accepted as a fact. And that Jupiter has moons, it's also accepted as a fact. But the methodology was the indirect observation of electromagnetic waves via a mirror. And so let's wind the clock up to the present day, more than 300 years later, where we have digital technology, and I'm using digital recordings and digital filtering, which is the digital mirror that I'm using is lossless. There is 100% reflectivity of the signal. There is no signal loss through the use of the mirror filter in my application. The performance of my procedure is 34% better than Isaac Newton's. Mm-hmm. So if people are prepared to accept Isaac Newton's claims about seeing the reflections of Venus and Jupiter in a mirror, then I think it's time for us to begin to consider that observation, indirect observation through reflection, is a means to study other types of electromagnetic waveforms, including digital audio recordings, which is what this study that we're presenting tonight is based upon. This isn't psychological in nature at all. This is as valid as the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
Well, with that in mind, let's proceed. Let's wind up the clock to late January 2014, and my most recent article, my follow-up article, where I had the opportunity once again to evaluate the testimony of Edward Snowden, and mysteriously enough, in our stage-managed disclosure, as we've identified, his interview with North German television broadcaster NDR was actually very difficult for people in North America to access. There's claims that the interview has been torn down.
I have it. I have a copy of it.
As you say, and mindful people such as yourself have found ways to archive that material, but there are claims, if we look around the internet or people talking about this issue on Facebook, that they can't access or have had trouble accessing, or the hosting websites where it used to reside, you can no longer get it. So
it's not easy. It's not easy. Trust me. It's not easy.
I went directly to the NDR website, I think the day of or within a couple of days of the broadcast, and was able to access the video soundtrack and the transcript at the same time, and that was my source. And so in this further study, this live audio from Edward Snowden, I hoped to either refute or validate my earlier claim. I hoped to find messages that he would either expand upon this concept that Edward Snowden had proximity to UFO and ET data, or somehow refute that, and that that story would fizzle out, and that would be the end of it. As it turned out, I was able to find more evidence, and quite frankly, the quality of the evidence was superior in terms of volume and presentation. It was superior to that initial finding. What this said to me was that my compass had pointed in the right direction. That indication that I had anticipated earlier had come to greater fruition, and that Edward Snowden had more to say about the UFO extraterrestrial issues. So with that in mind, if we could roll up one of the clips, the first clip I'd like to look at, the message, just rolling this up here, knows an alien. This is a two-part message that we'll hear, and while you're getting that rolling that up.
Ready.
So we'll hear him speaking forwards about how every country in the world has the data of their citizens. Their citizens' data is held by the NSA, millions and millions of data connections, et cetera, et cetera. And I heard two messages that are isolated in those statements. The first one says knows an alien, and the second one says variable alien. We leave with it. So if we could please play that audio.
World has the data of their citizens in the NSA. Millions and millions and millions of data connections from Germans going about their daily lives, talking on their cell phones, sending SMS messages, visiting websites, buying things online. All of this ends up at the NSA. And it's reasonable to suspect that the BND may be aware of it in some capacity. Now, whether or not they actively provide the information, I should not say.
Yes.
So I'm beginning to now hear other language. First, I'm identifying terms related to UFOs, but now I'm hearing the word alien. And people who have followed my work, particularly my studies of the testimonies of the UFO contactees, the well-known individuals such as Betty Hill, during their discussions of their incidents, there are many, many recordings of these personalities that I've drawn on. Their language is rife with these terms. They reference UFOs, they reference saucers, they reference aliens. From my desk, Edward Snowden is talking like someone who's had proximity to that knowledge or information. I'm hearing the word alien. It's very interesting, and I'm saying, well, this is a lead that's worth following. There's more to it. Let's go to our next clip just to get these on the air, which states, "First, I prove." And here we'll listen to Edward Snowden talking about secret servers in German telecommunications providers. And when I listen to the reflection of that, I hear him say the words, "First I prove the alien heard our memory."
Okay, here we go.
The kind of things that they're discussing there are two things. They're talking about filtering of ingest, which means when the NSA puts a secret server in a German telecommunications provider, or they hack a German router and they divert the traffic in a manner that lets them search through things, they're saying, if I see what I think is a German talking to another German, I'll drop it. But how do you know?
Yes, in our memory, alien in our memory. Okay, there was a question about the first part, the one you played before this. They said they heard the alien, but they didn't hear the second phrase. So could you repeat what the second phrase was of the pod before this?
My conclusion was, in the second phrase, the word stated variable, alien, we leave with it.
Okay.
So I heard him say, knows an alien, variable alien, we leave with it. And let's talk a little bit interpretatively about both of these statements before we go to our final clip. So here, the word knowledge suggests cognition, knowledge of an alien, knowledge of an extraterrestrial, something related to aliens and extraterrestrials, awareness of that subject or that issue. But he's giving this involuntarily while he's talking about NSA privacy and spying, and particularly in Germany. The second part says variable alien, we leave with it. Well, it's the legend of Edward Snowden states he left the NSA with a whole bunch of secret files. And I'm assuming that he's talking about information related to extraterrestrials that are included in the files that he took. And by stating variable, perhaps it's a bargaining chip. That is something that is a card that he intends to play later, or somebody intends to play it. I mean, if you believe the New World Order perspective on ET Space Wars, that Dr. Werner von Braun said that the ET Space Wars would be a card that the military-industrial complex would play on the public to foment mass hysteria and a police state and illegal war. So the alien variable to me is almost like a bargaining chip in this sense. Either that Edward Snowden possesses something that he doesn't want to play just yet, but he may use it to change the game, to bargain his way through the world. Right now he's in Russia. He's trying to get to other countries. I'm projecting that when I see that he says he left with it. Well, he left with a whole bunch of files. I think he left with some extraterrestrial files. In that, if we accept that's what he did, I'm saying that makes sense to me. In the second message, the one we just listened to, I'm interpreting that as, first, I prove the alien heard our memory. And this idea of hearing a memory is a very interesting concept. He says he refers to our memory, applying to himself amongst a group of people. It's the first person plural. Our memory. So for someone to hear our memory, an outside party to hear our memory is strongly suggestive of telepathy or clairaudience. You see. Yeah. And this is why I described this story in reference to the psychic ETs, because apparently Edward Snowden feels that some people were being eavesdropped upon by extraterrestrials, and it was a form of eavesdropping that was accessing the contents of their consciousness. It wasn't the contents of their telephone calls, their emails, their Twitter accounts, or their Skype communications. Mm-hmm. It was the contents of their consciousness. Memory resides within consciousness. And so this is profound. When we think about what I had referred to earlier as the black project initiatives focused on mind wars against human psychology, the psychic warrior, the psychic assassin, the cultivation of psychic assassins through the torture and psychological destruction of children, through conditioning, multi-personality disorder, MK Ultra. All of those initiatives, those deeply entrenched initiatives in the society, well-funded and multi-generationally staffed, here we have non-official, uncontrolled disclosure about psychic extraterrestrials. There's profound implications to that related to individual autonomy and freedom for members of our society, in that we can anticipate that if extraterrestrials are talking to humans who aren't members of the government through psychic and telepathic means, that there is a sharing of information that is uncensored and uncontrolled by the government occurring. If the government is engaged in dialogues or cultural liaisons with extraterrestrial populations, and at the same time those extraterrestrial populations are going around the back of the government and engaging directly with the members of the public, there's perceptions of a loss of control in that situation.
Right.
So this is why I say this is apple cart upsetting topic.
We could also indicate that it's possible that the reason why they're going to such great lengths to collect all this information is because they want to have that ability to be omnipresent and to have the information for whatever their purposes are. We can only speculate that it's something diabolical. I love that word, but
this paranoia and obsession with control from a psychological perspective relates to concepts of a lack of personal self-control. Mm-hmm. That in the absence of any self-restraint, we attempt to restrain everybody else,
right,
as a projection of our own insecurity. But to go back to this point about the extraterrestrials bypassing official channels and going direct to the population is, I would suspect, extremely disturbing to the vested interests who are trying to thought police the population, and B, psychic warrior the population, like spy on the population via remote viewing and other means. Now they've got these extraterrestrials who are like ostensibly from more advanced civilization, bypassing the government and going straight to the public. I mean, that could be perceived as a means of destabilizing the society in terms of why do we need a government if we can go straight to the extraterrestrials for the advanced knowledge, you know?
Right. That's a good point, because I was looking at it the other way, that the reason why they're doing all this with HARP and with the NSA and everything is to try to create in a mechanical sense those abilities that they're lacking. So, yeah. I like the way you're looking at it. Yeah.
But so what you're sharing, to elaborate on that, is that there are indications that HARP is part of the Mind Wars scenario being used to broadcast unconscious brainwashing to people in their sleep, for example, which is an explanation for why so many people who are in activist populations will report dreams about being in private meetings with President George W. Bush, and George W. is such a family guy and such a great buddy, and everyone's on such great terms. You see, because it's perceived that that's a form of instrumental brainwashing, and it's related to HARP, and this is reported widely in the activist community. Such phenomena taking place in their sleep. It's dream warfare is a term that's used to describe that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many issues that we can touch on, but we only have like half an hour left, so we can go more into the ET, a UFO phenomenon if you'd like to.
I'd like
conclude.
I'd like to wind up the third clip that we have yet to play, and so this I felt is even a deeper level of disclosure. All of these tidbits of information to me are a roadmap to a deeper understanding of what potentially is in the files at the NSA or at the CIA related to the nature of the extraterrestrials and the human extraterrestrial dynamic. So consciously, Edward Snowden here discusses the potential that the NSA isn't collecting information on the German citizens within Germany, but maybe doing it at the border as soon as they exit the country. And so let's listen together to the clip. In reverse, I hear him say, "The alien that is human, then their blood is human."
If the NSA isn't collecting information on German citizens in Germany, are they as soon as it leaves German borders? And the answer is yes. Any single communication that transits the internet, the NSA may intercept at multiple points. They might see it in Germany, they might see it in Sweden, they might see it in Norway or Finland, they might see it in Britain, and they might see it in the United States.
Okay, I have to admit that I didn't hear that as clear as I did the other three.
All right. So between the two of us, I'm alone in resolving that, and I can accept that there's a difference of opinion.
Could we play it again? Could we?
Sure, of course.
Could we? Yeah, let's try that one more time, because I think what this indicates is something that, I'm hoping that. Here we go.
If the NSA isn't collecting information on German citizens in Germany, are they as soon as it leaves German borders? And the answer is yes. Any single communication that transits the internet, the NSA may intercept at multiple points. They might see it in Germany, they might see it in Sweden, they might see it in Norway or Finland, they might see it in Britain, and they might see it in the United States.
Okay, I did hear the alien is human, and the word blood wasn't as clear.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure if I listened to it, it seemed like it was eliminated. Like I didn't even hear anything. That word was omitted. It sounded like.
What I'd like to share with you is my perspective on what your testimony tells me. The most important thing that your testimony tells me right now is that in spite of whatever powers of persuasion people might attribute to me, that I make all these bold claims about my experience in broadcasting and journalism and analysis and UFO contact, in spite of whatever I may try to do to persuade you or convince you, it's apparent to me that, in fact, I am unable to make you hear anything.
Right.
I can't make you hear what I want you to hear, if that is what I want you to hear. In fact, I'm really not attached to the outcome of our exercise, in the sense of, like, I can accept that there's a difference of perspective, but I think more importantly, for critics who might say, well, John, you're just hypnotizing people. That's why they're hearing this stuff, is because you told them what to hear. But here's Chrissy, and Chrissy, you're my supporter. I mean, you're inviting me to be a guest on your show. You're shouting my virtues from the rooftops.
Absolutely.
But I still can't make you hear things, and that should be an important indication to the critics that I have no power to make people hear anything.
Right, and it's important. That last pod was important because your assertion that they're not extraterrestrial but terrestrial aliens, that they're coming right from our planet, and so this pod of all of them would give more credence to your assertion that that's been your perspective. That's what you've been able to observe in the work that you've been accumulating over the last decade or so, however long you've been researching this.
Well,
so,
to clarify, while I state or claim that I'm hearing the word human, I am not saying it's not as important to me that that's an indication. I had said earlier that they're indigenous, that they're here, but that they're, for me, the key point about this is simply that they're like us.
right.
They have human blood. They bleed red like we do. They are more like us. Although we describe them as aliens, at least in the grammar, the vocabulary of the Snowden messages, they're described as alien, which implies that they're different. The statement that their blood is human is profound, in that these extraterrestrials who would ostensibly be so different from us. I mean, mainstream science talks about extremomorphs, which are like spirulina that live in the Antarctic Ocean. In extreme
temperatures. Yep.
And it's projected that this is what astrobiologists are going to find on other planets is alien spirulinas. And the difference between a human being and a spirulina is kind of profound.
Right.
But here, we're marrying the concept of extraterrestrials with humans, beings that are like us. And I think that is meaningful, because it also kind of blows the lid on all of the media portrayals and, quite frankly, the obsession with portrayals of almond-eyed extraterrestrials, which is like the sort of the de facto, little green man of the popular culture. That doesn't look like a human,
right.
Whereas here, definitively, from my desk, from my position as an observer, Snowden states unconsciously that the blood is human. It not only implies that he's had access to medical files, ostensibly obtained during crash recovery or autopsies on victims of crash recoveries, or people who are otherwise brought into medical environments for examination. But it seems to me that there's this profound concept that these ostensible aliens, whom we should be vilifying and demonizing, we discover that we are us and they are them. We're closer than we would have imagined. Their blood is like ours. There's a relationship. Now, that could be extrapolated in a lot of ways. As you said, one of the avenues I explored earlier was that maybe they're from here, or at least they've been here a long time, let's say. But also that the human heritage in conventional science. It's widely understood that there's a lot of unexplained questions with regards to the origins of Homo sapiens. Whereby people are discussing unknown populations that interbred with our ancestors to produce the modern human being, and they have yet to be identified. There's a lot of questions about what's in our DNA and how much of it is human and extraterrestrial, or human and Neanderthal, or human and Denisovans, or all these different questions. So, are the extraterrestrials, are they our precursors? Are we descended from them? Is that why we have strange quirks in our in our genetic character as human beings. So just to sort of expand those points, it's important for me to say that ultimately, I think as an experiencer as well as someone's engaging in live contact, the sense of closeness or identification with these entities is something that's strong and profound, and it characterizes my contact experiences, which are certainly not as vibrant or intensely illustrated as the testimonies of very famous contactees. But one of the takeaways I've had from engaging in those experiences is that it's possible for people, the humans and the people operating the UFOs, to be on the same page and to have a shared space, to have a sense of identification. And with that comes the lack of desire to make war against those populations. When we start to see them as they're like us, they're like family, they're like community, that is sort of a foundation of peaceful relations. It lifts the veil of ignorance and bigotry, from our minds, and brings us into a place of commonality and shared. That our struggles on the ground are shared with. They're sharing in our struggles, if only psychically or spiritually. That collectively we're part of a larger struggle. So this ultimately, from a spiritual perspective, then this leads me to discussions about divisiveness and division in human society and the political divisions of populations. We know that the UFO community is intensely divided, and the rhetoric is very hot between the different communities who gather or assemble under the banner of UFO research and exploration and who want to learn and study about this. It's intense polarization. From the simplest maxim, it relates to divide and conquer. That we're impotent under conditions of division, and that we're only going to accomplish something under conditions of unity. Now, I'm one of the principal seasonal videographers at the ECETI Ranch at Mount Adams, and I've been doing that for several years. And one of my takeaways from that experience is that the team building exercise that happens by working in the field to collect the recordings with James Gilliland, his crew, and his guests is very important part of the dynamic that's working there to enable us to be facilitators for those contacts and to be participants and recipients of those events. That because of the harmony that we're able to manifest working together in that way, the team building that's happening is facilitating better contact, and it's profound. I mean, there's so much that one location is certainly not the only location in the world where contacts are happening, but it is profound in terms of the region for volume of incidents. It's over the top how much UFO material comes out of that place on a nightly basis. It's just it's ridiculous how many unknowns are flying over and displaying or differentiating themselves from the known objects. It's over the top. I say that what's in relation to that is our ability to work together, to harmonize and to integrate socially, and to form community amongst neighbors and friendship. This is a key lesson that I've taken from the front lines. That if we want to experience powerful and profound gifts that life is prepared to offer us, this world is prepared to open doors for us into profound experience. We have to come with an integrative approach rather than a divisive approach.
And I totally agree with you. Before we leave the Snowden story, I guess the question I was formulating as we go through this process was, how does this validate Snowden as really a whistleblower as compared to what was brought up in the beginning by the people in chat, that he's just a psyops, he's just I don't want to say a patsy, but just someone who's being used to manipulate the public. So
my conclusions identify him as someone privy to this information, and it colors his statements with regards to NSA operations, and that the parallelism, the synchronous timeline occurrence of these messages in league with his conscious statements is an indication that this is a subtext to the disclosures, the formal disclosures that he's offering. So whether or not, in other words, whether or not he's actually rebelled against the intelligence agencies or is still working as an intelligence operative, I would say that it doesn't make a difference in terms of my conclusions, because under either condition he could still have access to that type of data that has been collected by those agencies. We know that they have collected it. We know that because both the NSA and CIA have released documents about their UFO research.
Right.
So
interesting.
So to clarify again, he may be a traitor. He may be a hero, but in terms of my conclusions, it's irrelevant, because all I'm saying is that he knows something about the UFO issue, and it's deeply repressed within him to the point that he's not talking about it in these formal interviews. My analysis or my deciphering is a very, very far over the horizon analysis that I'm looking at potential disclosure that he may give at some future date, and the premise upon which I make that statement is twofold in immediate examples that I can draw from. One, I reported military-grade intelligence concerning the Iraq War 2 years before it began.
Right.
That's a 2-year difference between the date of my report, the first report, and the actual events coming into play and becoming public, a matter of mainstream discourse. Everyone knows there was an Iraq War, but I was talking about it in detail. I was talking about the first day of the Iraq War in military precise language in January 2001, the Monday after the president's inaugural on the Saturday. So that's really important to understand, that there's third-party documentation of my reporting, and it's published on YouTube, on one of my YouTube channels. It's independent third-party documentation. It's public. It's a matter of public record that happened. But two is my study of the BTK killer case in Wichita, Kansas, whereby I identified the killer before he confessed, and I did so on the air in Wichita, Kansas, before the first hearing, which was where the killer confessed. I identified Dennis Rader as the killer because of demonic possession-related material in his unconscious speech. And this paralleled the letters of the known killer that had been written to the press and the police in Wichita in the 1970s, that had been vetted by police as authentic letters from the real killer because they contained factual details about the crime scenes that had not been released to the public. So police investigators will withhold information so that when people make fraudulent claims or fraudulent confessions, they can vet those confessions versus the known facts. But these letters contained the known facts, and so the police said this is the authentic letter, and those letters stated that the killer in those letters said he was possessed. But what happened subsequent to my report, which I was the first and only person to bring Dennis Rader and demonic possession into the same sentence, and I did it in the hometown where the case was heard. 2 weeks after Rader confessed in a very gruesome hearing to all of the crimes, 2 weeks after he was being ferried out to serve a long jail sentence, and he was interviewed by the local media to comment on the case, and he stated aloud in conscious speech that he felt that he was possessed by a demon. So I went in with a report concerning Dennis Rader's demons, and 2 weeks later he volunteered that independently. So when I'm coming forwards with Edward Snowden's psychic human extraterrestrials today, I'm anticipating that it's quite possible, based on the track record, my history, my performance in this field, it's quite possible that at a future date that this can be vetted and verified either by real-world events or by direct statements from the speaker himself. That's the premise upon which I'm making these assertions.
Absolutely, and you can also tell us a little bit about your counseling service using this technique and why you feel it's so effective.
Because one of the consequences of our society's organized abuse of the public in terms of MK Ultra type programs that abuse psychiatric and mental health patients, that's a legacy issue going back decades. is also the sexual abuse of children and the culture of denial that surrounds such abuse, meaning that the victims have suffered in silence, either due to church suppression, in the Catholic Church as one well-recognized institution that has harbored those pedophiles, but two, the government suppression, as in the case of Michael Aquino, where it has been widely reported over decades, his involvement with multiple cases, including Boys Town, including Johnny Gosch, the Presidio, that a shield of national security has been used to protect the pedophiles.
Right.
And so this has led to populations of victims who are suffering in silence. And what I'm doing is I'm providing a reinvigorated talk therapy that collapses discovery timelines into one session, whereby people can attain catharsis and reintegration with those deepest, most repressed parts of the self that have been vilified, judged, and suppressed. And this is great hope for the victims, because the larger the population of victims become, the more dysfunctional the society becomes en masse. And when the victims are able to reintegrate and heal and become well and reclaim their lives, they become functioning members of society, and the society benefits as a consequence of an uptick in functioning members, not the consequences of criminal acts that are being shielded under the guise of national security. So that, to speak bluntly, these are the conditions that we face. The brave people like Kevin and Annette, who are trying to bring justice to the biggest of the perpetrators, are acting on the behalf of the silenced victims, the indigenous populations, the First Nations people who've suffered in silence, who've been marginalized. This procedure that I'm following is exceptionally simple. Simply, we're using mirrors and reflection. We're applying it to the speech signal, and it's intensely revealing. I would go so far as to say that based on my clinical practice and experience and observations of the progress of my clients, that there is really no limit as to what can be penetrated into in terms of brainwashing, mind control, the fracturing of personalities, dissociation due to trauma. There's nothing that cannot be resurfaced and resolved through the identification of communications from the unconscious. It's deeper than all of that entrainment and conditioning. This natural form of disclosure, this natural encoded disclosure, runs deeper than all of the mechanisms of suppression and denial. It runs deeper than all of them. And so there's hope. I said there's hope for all of the victims of the worst atrocities. If they've survived, if they're still alive, and they can talk, they can benefit from such a procedure. And so I've created a grassroots practitioner's role to ensure that this procedure is widely available and is affordable. My rates are half those of what a psychologist will charge, and a psychologist operating under mainstream conventions will maintain a long-term process of discovery, whereby I am collapsing the discovery timeline into a 10-minute interview, which is all I need to study. I break away for 40 minutes to produce some results, and I share those in a second call with the client. It all takes place within a 2-hour period, and through those listenings and explorations and inner sensing that comes with that, there are powerful resolutions that the clients are comparing to personal exorcisms.
Wow.
I mean, they are just, this is intensely liberating for people to be able to make contact with the most painful of the issues that are the key or turnkey issues, that the turnkey inhibitors, when those are released, the powers of creativity that manifest within the personality and the behavior changing and the personality transforming resources come to bear are intense and meaningful. And that is, it's being with the participants in those moments that is what keeps me in my practice, because it's profound to be a witness to authentic growth and transformation. I can't say enough about how deeply meaningful and how deeply educational that is for me, the honor that I have and the privilege that I have to work so closely with people. But to clarify, I function, I offer my procedure almost entirely by telephone. So people participating in these sessions are on different continents, or they're thousands of miles away. All I need is a speech signal to work with them. and to deliver the session. It's all done by sound. There's no need for physical proximity. All of the issues that color the failures and breakdowns in modern medicine pertaining to doctor-patient abuses are mitigated by there's no necessity for physical presence. The practitioner doesn't need to be anywhere near the patient in this method, and that's great because particularly for people who've been seeking resources to aid in resolving abuse. There are a lot of problems with corrupt practitioners further abusing the victims. In other words, sexually assaulting the victims under the pretense of being their therapist. That's a serious problem that exists in conventional therapy, particularly for the victims of sexual abuse. So to speak to the dignity of those individuals and their personhood and their capacity for surviving the pain and suffering that they have, this avenue that I've sustained over these many years is intended to provide a resource that mitigates the majority of variables that have led to problems in other practices, in other methodologies. We're really putting the X-nay on the bull crap and going straight to the resolution, and that's what I'm committed to. And as I say, it's profound to be able to participate and work with people in that capacity. It's very meaningful, and ultimately, on a one-by-one basis, it leads to repopulating society with high-functioning people, and those people are contributing to making a better society for everybody.
Wonderful. Is this a practice that you could teach somebody to do for themselves, or is it something that works best with a witness?
It's facilitated. My practice, I act as a facilitator,
right.
But because I record the entire session and I submit the archive to the client, they retain that for their records, for their study, their educated purposes. In other words, I model best practices that are refined over years, not only of clinical work, but forensic, other types of intelligence gathering, and particularly my work has been heavily vetted. I can do this on camera for CBS television.
Right.
I mean, so in other words, I'm offering access to expert level resources that have withstood the test of time. It's highly educative, even for someone who simply wants to learn about the procedure, to engage as a participant, because there is a lot they can learn just from studying how an expert conducts themselves and how they perform the session and provide interpretation and analyze and produce results and so on. It's highly informative and educative for anybody who wants to learn. Now, I have led other educational programs in the past, and I'm in a publishing mode now because I've identified a new distribution platform for media content, which means that I'm going to be offering more and more educational materials online in 2014. So people who are interested in trainings and other kinds of opportunities, I invite them to stay in touch with me through my website, for example, yourinnervoice.com. Stay in touch with me to follow up on that and look for opportunities there. But in terms of what's immediately available, I'm offering services as an expert level practitioner with complete documentation that allows people to study my methodology, my approach to interpretation analysis. They can see how the work is done by an expert, a heavily vetted expert, and in terms of the costs, the personal costs and the infrastructure costs to do the kinds of scientific experiments that I've conducted on widespread populations, regional populations, and the data sampling that I've been able to do. Replicating that would not be easy for people to just come up and do that. I survived years of this and years of struggles related to establishing my practice and sustaining it. In other words, I paved the way. I did some pioneering in this area for the sake of people who follow. So, my hope is that people are enabled and empowered, and that a valid procedure is put in the hands of people who can help to contribute to expanding the growth and development of human consciousness and the wellness of our society. We are in much need of resources for wellness. I'm simply one practitioner amongst many people on the frontiers of alternative health. There's many other methodologies that are out there. Mine is has a certain novelty factor to it. But as you said earlier, this isn't just a gimmick. I'm producing scientifically testable, measurable, and vettable information. I'm saying it's as meaningful as Newton's observations through the reflector telescope.
Yeah, and probably more instructive because you're working with the individual and helping them to heal on a psychological and social levels. So I would say, finding objects out in space is important, but your ability to work with people and help them to find themselves and heal themselves is probably a much more instructful and helpful
The space within us is what we're studying. The premise of the wellness model is that the universe is acoustic in nature, and that the mind itself the foundations of the mind are acoustic. Acoustic meaning sound oriented.
Absolutely, yes.
And so
everything's vibration. Yep.
So we're utilizing sound to stimulate those the core infrastructure of the mind, and with testable and measurable results. It's profound. People are claiming they have catharsis in one session. It's a short-term intervention. It's sound-based. It relies on natural phenomena of speech and listening. There's not a lot of special qualifications that are required to be a participant. But as I say, at the practitioner level, there's substantial responsibility. The foremost responsibility is an ethical one. And so we know that the Hippocratic Oath denotes do no harm as a foundation of Western medicine, harmlessness. Yeah. So, great care. As I said, I cited the abuse victims are further abused by corrupt practitioners, and this is very destructive. And something that has to be avoided. Anybody who's been given the keys to the mind bears substantial ethical duty to avoid reckless conduct and to do everything in their power to ensure a successful outcome for the participant.
Well, it's been a wonderful interview, and I greatly appreciate that you're bringing this Snowden information to us here at Awake Radio and Shiz's Radio. And before we leave, we have a couple minutes. Do you want to give out your websites again?
Yeah, so people can find me online. The core hub of my work, where everything's linked from, is a website called yourinnervoice.com. So people can find me online at yourinnervoice.com. They can also use my toll-free number if they want to call in and talk to me or get in touch with me, which is a North America toll-free number. It's 1-888-453-0751, 1-888-453-0751. There had been reports of problems with the system or greeting message there. There's no charge for the call or for leaving a message. To clarify that, if you do get some anomalous greeting that indicates there's some kind of charge, please ignore that. It's more important that people reach out. If they feel inspired to reach out and make contact. Yourinnervoice.com. Secret Message TV on YouTube is my YouTube channel. It's over 1 million views. We're en route to 5,000 subscribers. A lot of great information there. Diverse information, news and coverage, lots of UFO video for people who love that stuff. YouTube's first live UFOs on YouTube are on my channel. I produced the first live UFO broadcasts on YouTube, and they're on Secret Message TV. Look me up, Jon Kelly, JONKELLY, on YouTube, yourinnervoice.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter.